I rolled a 9.
A 9. Andy, the question we'll be discussing this week is, do you share the plot points and secrets your players missed with your players? Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Well, Andy, I'm back.
Chris, we've missed you. I've missed you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Hasn't quite been the same without you. Mostly because I've had to do all of the audio editing.
Yes.
So.
Although editing, you still had to record the episodes and stuff. Yeah, so I'm back from paternity leave, and I will tell you that despite being back from paternity leave, it turns out I still have a baby. So I still have all the stuff and the responsibilities and things, but I guess I'm a little less tired, maybe, or more used to it now.
So, Chris, can you tell us one outrageously cute thing that your baby does that, you think is an amazingly cute story that everyone else will be like, oh, it's just a baby, whatever?
Yeah, this is perfect. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my baby.
Yeah.
And also for limiting me to one thing.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So my son is 2 months old, and he's trying very hard to talk already.
Oh.
So he can kind of say hello right now.
Oh my goodness.
It's like he just sort of mimics us in tone and sort of like the syllables a little bit, but it sounds sort of like Hodor.
Okay.
It's a little dopey, but it's really cute.
It sounds adorable. And at 2 months, I think you might have some sort of a genius on
Please
your hands.
Yeah. we just want a normal, healthy
You don't
child.
want the Kwisatz Haderach.
No. Please no. I read the first book and it just did not go well.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the one cute story. Yeah, so I think in a couple of weeks, right, when he has some vocabulary, he'll start running a game for us. So
Let's get him booked.
Get him booked. Yeah. I did want to ask you a question though, Andy. So my daughter is getting to the age where she is getting into Legos for the first time, like where she's actually can sit down and build something, which is super fun.
Yeah.
So she's starting to use her imagination a little bit more with that too, right? Like she'll want to build other stuff, things like that. But we also started telling each other, I started telling her stories about one of her stuffed animals. So this is sort of my first step towards like, hey, let's do some like adventuring sort of thing. So I told her a story about her stuffed rabbit named Cookie, who wanted to go on an adventure, and Cookie went on an adventure and she lit a fire and she was going to sleep for the night. And then a bad rabbit came to try to take her stuff in the middle of the night. So my daughter's reaction was, well, I take it back and then I go inside and never go on another adventure.
Okay.
So
she's the Bilbo Baggins of
It was exactly that. Unfortunately, I'm not Gandalf, so I cannot force her through nefarious means. But yeah, so my question to you is like, what was the first sort of story or little game that you played with your kids that you felt like really set them on the right path of wanting to be a giant nerd?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't know if I remember. It would have been with my daughter, who's now 12. I had lots of experiences with my daughter of like proto role-playing sorts of things. And I just genuinely don't remember what the first experience was. But I think it was, I used to tell her bedtime stories that I would, kind of make up on the fly. And I would just give her choices at points in those stories. Nothing like dice rolling or character sheets or anything like that. But just, choose your own adventure type of stuff.
Yeah.
With real simple choices. And probably around the same time, we also started messing around with taking a couple of board games we had that just had some good like fantasy dungeon tile-y type pieces to them. And telling little stories with those, having, just branching choices here and there. And I think on that we might have started rolling the dice just mostly because it's fun to roll the dice, not because there is any real need to like add up the combat values or anything like that. But so I think it started with bedtime stories that had a little bit of a choose your own adventure aspect to them.
Yeah, That's good. Yeah, we also play a game with the dice, right? So we have a giant kind of bowl that's full of D&D dice, for lack of a better term, because, right, again, like we're nerds and stuff. So she invented this game where we basically take a handful of them and we roll them and try to get like matched numbers.
I promise you there is a commercial game out there somewhere that is exactly that.
Yeah.
And it costs like $35.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably. It's not a very fun game, but it's good for her, like reading numbers and things like that. But yeah, so I need to sort of like blend these stories and then also the dice rolling stuff together somehow, start weaving them into something.
Yeah, at some point the randomness that dice bring really can add something fun in the kid's mind, I think.
Yeah.
Not randomness like you succeeded or you failed so much as just what interesting thing is going to happen. Let's roll and find out instead of deciding ourselves.
Anyway, so we should get onto our actual topic.
Indeed.
Rather than talking about our kids, which is what happens when dads talk. But
yeah, it's the worst. Like we hate ourselves for it, but we do it anyway. So.
But you can't help yourself. Yeah, but so the topic, right, that you rolled is about, do you share the plot points and secrets your players miss with your players? So the thought behind this question, I believe, is, right, like, so when you have that really good, like, kind of secret, or there's some sort of, like, cool plot line that your players just did not find or didn't go down that path for whatever reason, after the session or, like, shortly thereafter, do you tell them about it or do you keep it secret?
It's an interesting question, and like you say, lurking behind this question is that bigger topic of what do you do with all the stuff that doesn't come up in your games, right? So my flippant, quick answer to this question was no, but over the last couple of minutes, I've been thinking about it, and I think that I sometimes do. It's not in any major way, but if the players like missed something big, whether it was good or bad, I do often, once the game is done and there's no chance of it affecting the game anymore, I will say, oh, by the way, if you had gone left, you would have run into whatever, the skeleton lich. And then we all have a good laugh about it. I don't break out my notes, and show them, here's the rest of the complex that you didn't explore. But it is sometimes kind of fun to just let them know, hey, like your choices, did actually have an impact on what you experienced tonight, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what is so the reason you share is, right, because you get something out of it too, right? Like I don't think players do want to sort of know like all the possibilities, right? They would love to just be able to just sort of hit save and rewind and kind of keep trying stuff over and over. But like, I think, because I have the same inclinations too, right? Like sometimes I just really need to share it. Like I just have to share it. And it's always for me, it's not necessarily for the players, right? Because it's like, that's also going back to that, like they can't save, they can't go back, they can't redo that at all. So it's like, what I'm trying to ask is like, so is that satisfying like your need as a storyteller to tell the players that, or is it, something else going on?
I do have players will sometimes ask after a game, what would have happened if we had turned left, or what if we had what if we had taken the job from Mr. X instead of from Mr. Y. And sometimes there's just simple curiosity, or maybe a concern that they missed out on something amazingly cool, which is rarely the case, because if it was that amazingly cool, I'll make sure that they get a chance to experience it. But as for, what you get out of it, for players, I think they're, a little bit of curiosity can be satisfied. For GMs, I don't know, I think we all get a little bit of a kick out of being that sort of keeper of secrets. I know that modern trends in gaming kind of discourages this idea of the GM as like the lore master of the game, brimming with secrets and knowledge that the players will have to pry out of him or her through gameplay. But I think in most GMs there is that glee that you know a lot more than the players, and it's fun to flaunt that a little bit in a fun way, not in a jerk sort of way.
Yeah, it's. Or like, so when you read about like advice to GMs and stuff, a lot of times they'll talk about like, just save all that stuff because you could reuse it later, right? Like, is sort of the hope is, oh, they didn't go left, so you've prepared that side of the dungeon, you can reuse that part of the dungeon later on. Stuff. I don't find myself doing that a whole lot. Like, I don't have this store of like, here's half of a dungeon that I could just run whenever is convenient. That's just not exactly how my brain works and stuff. So I think like for me, whenever I want to share, it's like, that door that you almost went in, but you decided not to, like that had this bugbear behind it or whatever. Yeah, and I think there's something fun about kind of dishing out that information, exactly as you were saying.
So when you prepare a game, and this is a topic we've probably touched on in various ways over past episodes, do you prepare in such a way that there is like a pretty reasonable chance that your players will miss a lot of what you prepared? Do you prepare just the stuff that you're quite certain the PCs are going to experience? How frequently does it happen that the PCs like just miss a big part of the experience because of a choice they made?
That's a good question. I would say I tend to prepare sort of just the material that I think they're going to go over. So it's pretty rare for them to miss, say, like, an entire wing of the dungeon. Although it's certainly happened. I think I try to steer them towards seeing the cool stuff that they should. Right? Like, if there's something that's in that side of the dungeon that, like, was worth it for them to go see, I would try to either move it or otherwise sort of push them towards, hey, maybe you should go back and re-explore this part of the dungeon, and not like oh, you missed that part, right? Like, it's a little bit more subtle than that, I think, because right, like, you do, like, if there is some sort of cool sword that you left for a particular player in that dungeon, like, it'd be a shame for them to miss it, right? Like, I mean, of course, yes, that sword could show up somewhere else and all that, but like, I don't get a lot of pleasure out of, like, there's all these secret things that they missed, right? Like, when I play video games, if there's secret rooms in those video games, I want to find them. I don't want to find out later that, oh, I missed 50% of the game, 50% of the secrets and stuff.
You know, one thing that affects this when you run mostly games that only run for maybe 2 or 3 hours, which is, I guess, pretty typical of me at this point in my GMing life, is that when you only have 2 hours, let's say you have 2 hours to play, games aren't usually super fast moving. Like, in a typical game session, PCs don't. In 2 hours, that's not a lot of time to cover a huge amount of real estate. So I find that it really isn't often like a problem for me to see what's coming. You know, when I'm preparing 2 hours with a material, that's not really that much space. You know, it's a pretty small area of, say, a dungeon, even if the dungeon itself is very large. So it's pretty rare that I spend like hours and hours, preparing the section of the dungeon that they never get to, because the way it works out is I'll see which area of the dungeon they're heading towards or what they're expressing interest in, and then, for the next game I will prepare in anticipation of the hints that they've already given me about what they want to do or the direction they want to go. So I honestly don't often find that there is a huge amount of info that they haven't seen or experienced.
As a player, have you ever had the GM kind of tell you what you missed?
I can't think of any specific examples, but I'm sure I've been in that spot of saying, oh, hey, what was up with that one guy that we didn't pay much attention to? Or, there's just this really small scenes. Nothing too huge, I don't think. You?
Similar, right? Like, I think my expectation is sort of like the GM is trying to lead us through a story somewhat, right? So, like, if something didn't come up, then it's fine, it didn't come up. Right, I could see if I was more of a completionist about D&D or whatever, right, it would be a little bit more like, I'd have kind of a laundry list of questions about what could have been. I played in a, like, sort of a hex crawl that Kyle Latino, former guest, who's been on the show a couple times, that he ran, and that was really interesting in that, like, there was just so much potential information that could have happened in that game, because it was a very expansive map and we moved pretty quickly from location to location, and he was just rolling on a bunch of tables to generate most of the storyline. And so that was an interesting experience in that, like, any of the questions that we would have had for him along the lines of like, oh, like, what did we miss? It was like, well, let's all decide what we missed, right? Like, that was sort of the tactic or the route that would have taken, because there was just like this huge possibility space in that game. Yeah, so it makes me sort of wonder if this question, like, how would it be different for, like, if you're running like a mega dungeon, right? Like, or, sort of a different kind of campaign other than sort of a narrative based one. Yeah. So if you were running a mega dungeon, right, like where you are naturally sort of coming up with a ton of different levels, or, you're preparing a bunch of different levels because they could be going all sorts of other places. Like, the thought with those is that you are going to miss a huge chunk of it, right? Yeah. Like, yeah. And so in that scenario, then, I don't know, like, would you agree? Like, do you think that you maybe do your players a disservice if you tell them the things that they miss, because then they can never really experience that part of it if they ever go back?
Yeah, those are all interesting points. While you were talking, I kind of wish that John Corey were here, because I would like to ask him this question in the context of like his Dungeon World campaigns that he runs, which are which I think he ad-libs to a pretty high degree. And I do think that one cost of games that rely on the GM and the players ad-libbing or being creative together on the fly to figure stuff out is you don't have that sense that you did in, like, say, first edition AD&D Mega Dungeon, this is like a big world full of secrets that it's on us to see how many of them we can uncover. And I'm not saying that isn't compensated for in other ways in games like Dungeon World and stuff like that. You know, I feel like in a lot of games today, you might collaborate with the players to figure out what some of these kind of secrets are. And I think that there is a certain appeal, though, in that, like, the secret is like set in stone what it is and how you do it, and the challenge is for you to figure out the key to get to it. It's been a while since we've brought up Dark Souls, the video game, so I'm going to do it here. Yeah. I've been replaying Dark Souls 3 recently, and that is a game that, in a kind of role-playing sense, is very full of secrets that you can miss. And knowing that the world is full of secrets when you enter a new area in that game, you know it's full of secrets and hidden treasures and monsters and traps, and you also know you are highly unlikely to uncover most or even a good percentage of them, you know, on your first run through. And that is a thrilling feel that there's all this stuff for me to uncover, but I could miss it, and I probably will miss it. And I think that can be a fun thing to aim for in a role-playing game as well. Just you and your players on the same page. Like, look, there's this big, you know, it's a mega dungeon or whatever. It's like, we've got this big puzzle environment for you. There's all sorts of great stuff. I'm not going to give you all the great stuff, and you might miss some of it. So let's just have fun seeing what you are able to uncover. And that's something I haven't really experienced in a role-playing game in a while, but it does make me think of early dungeons, like when I was a kid running first edition, stuff like that. It had a little bit more of that sense.
Yeah, like as you're talking about that, right? Because like I also love Dark Souls. Like, I mean, the way that game sort of interconnects back into itself is really fascinating, because it's these sort of like paths and things like that you could just miss entirely, right? And get through the game, and then maybe someone tells you about it later, or you run across it in a second playthrough. You're like, oh my goodness, how did I miss that? Those sorts of things. And that's like, I genuinely enjoy that. And I can't say that I've experienced that a ton at the table. Yeah, it's like, I'm thinking about, like, if you were to run a dungeon in which the sort of the critical path could be sort of 2 rooms, right? Like, you go in and you like get the thing and you get out, and like it's no big deal. But if you took, you know, a right instead of a left, if there ends up being like a mega dungeon, right? Like if it just goes down for like 5 or 6 floors and stuff like that, and your players just completely miss it, it would be almost impossible not to tell them that they missed it, right? Like it would take just a massive amount of self-control not to be like, oh, and there was a whole thing that I had prepared down there that you'll just never get to see, right? Because like, there's a sort of idealized version, I think, of D&D where there is sort of this like, all these things that are sort of written down in the GM's notebook and things like that. And if you don't encounter them, you don't encounter them. But like, as we said just a little bit earlier, right? Like if you miss that whole 5 or 6 level dungeon, right? That's going to show up somewhere else. Because if you prepared it, you're probably going to reuse it somewhere. But at the same time, like imagine as a player, like if you stumbled across that, you know, sort of seemingly by accident or because you made some sort of intuitive leap, if you discovered that sort of thing, like that would be amazing. Yeah. You know, like an amazing feeling to feel like you sort of cracked it, right?
Exactly. And I think there is a unique thrill if your players know that you will not hand feed them stuff that they don't figure out on their own. Then they deserve to feel excited and thrilled when they do find whatever that is, you know? I've noticed while we've been talking, one reason, you know, that we would share these sorts of secrets, like you say, is because we really don't anticipate that the players could ever come back and have a chance to experience it again. And I get the sense it's how most people run D&D these days. You know, certainly how I run it. You know, we do an adventure for a couple sessions and we move on to the next. I mean, and we're never gonna go back to like the dungeon we cleared, months ago. I think there are versions of this hobby in which players do go back, they retread ground that has been kind of explored. And again, I think that's a little bit of an old school thing. If one group goes through the Temple of Elemental Evil, it's this huge complex, they'll miss a lot of it just because it's so big. Maybe the same group will go through it again later with new characters or the same characters. I don't think that's how most campaigns are run, but when you are, it's safe to share secrets, when you're quite certain that you'll never be revisiting this. But talking about this makes me kind of pine for a setting that is big enough and interesting enough and compelling enough that players will want to stick around or return to it when they get a chance to maybe dig further into whatever it is that they missed,
Yeah. It's sort of, I think like every GM has the dream of running that same dungeon like 50 years apart or something. It's something along those lines, or having two groups, and like one group is affecting what's happening with the other group, and back and forth. And I think there's like some complexity to pulling that off, but also does sound like a fun challenge. I ran Lost Mines of Phandelver over the course of like a year, right, a couple years ago or so. Like, so I took, like, I milked that campaign completely, from top to bottom.
You got your money's worth out of that box set. Oh my goodness.
I think like Wizards should probably ask me to send them more money based on what I've gotten out of that. But like, I'm thinking about like, how fun would it be to pick up that campaign like in real world time, like a decade from now, with the same group of people, like enough that they've sort of forgotten maybe some of the details, right? And like just reuse maybe the same setting, like in some way. And it's like all those same locations are still there, right? But everything's sort of shifted over the years, right? Because like I think that could be really fun, right? And then you'd have a chance to sort of revisit some of those things that maybe they missed, or or looked over, or to like let them sort of explore the ramifications of what they did. That could be really fun. That's a really great long-term project, but it would take, again, quite a bit of self-control for you to not like give it away in the intervening years, right? Or like right afterwards, like, oh, like, and if you come back later, like this has happened to it.
Have you ever, this is going a little off topic, but have you ever seriously thought about running the same adventure a second time for people that already went through it? And I don't mean overhaul it so it's all different. I mean, we had fun with my Lost Mines of Phandelver, let's do it again.
Yeah, I've had that thought. I think that I would personally enjoy it. I don't know if the players would as much, but I could be wrong, right? Like, I guess I've never tried it. Have you?
I have
thought about this?
No, I have not. I have thought about it. I've thought about what it would take to make that fun, and I haven't figured out what would make that fun for everyone, so I haven't done it. I've certainly run the same adventure for different groups, like, many times. But I am a little intrigued by this idea. It's been on my mind recently because I've been reading through the new edition of the Enemy Within campaign for the Warhammer role-playing game. This is a famous role-playing campaign. It's a series of adventures that came out, I don't know, I think in like the 80s. I missed it when it came out, but for decades I've heard, Enemy Within, one of the great campaigns. And in the new edition, it's full of these sidebars that are like, basically, if you ran this in the 80s and are running it now, here's some suggestions for like shaking it up a little bit in case your characters remember, in case your players remember like who was the bad guy, and that sort of thing. And it's got all these, it's a campaign that's full of secrets and plots that if you did know who was actually behind it the whole time, it would kill, that has a high chance of killing the fun of the adventure. So that is kind of an unusual and unique situation. But it did make me think, if we had a blast with something, is there a way to play it again? Like, is there a way to play it again and focus on the stuff we missed, in the way that if I played Dark Souls again for like the 8th time, I'm looking in the parts of the game that I bypassed in my earlier playthroughs, right?
Yeah.
So I think, on a practical level, probably not. And I don't really think I'm ever going to do that. But it is an interesting kind of abstract idea to consider.
Yeah, it'd be tough. I mean, like, we certainly watch movies again and again and like read books over and over and over. Like, so there's absolutely precedent for consuming the same media, even when you know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and even with a D&D, or like any sort of role playing, tabletop role playing adventure, it's going to be different just because like you'll forget an accent, right? Or you'll have to say something else. You're not like reading off of a script. So it's going to naturally be different, even if sort of the general plot is the same. But like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, now I want to try it. Like, this is an infectious idea.
On the one hand, it sounds like it should work, right? Because there's so much randomness built into like a D&D game. There's no randomness when you watch, Fellowship of the Ring for the 13th time. There's no randomness, yes. Right? And we've both done that. Let's just admit it. Even if the players are mostly reprising the same roles they did on the first run through, the dice are just going to go differently. And dice rolls are going to have these butterfly effects on the whole direction of the campaign. So you would think that it would be satisfying. But like in practice, I feel like it probably wouldn't. It would be a struggle, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I mean, because it's sort of like the basic nature, I think, of D&D, and like D&D in particular, right, has this high level of like tactical combat to it, where I think if you remember, like, oh, in this room there's going to be 4 goblins, right? Like, you can sort of prepare more than you would have the first time you stumbled in there.
Yeah.
Right. So then it turns into a bit of a speed run at that point. But I mean, like, there's probably ways to just subtly change it. But then at that point, it's like, then why are you running the same thing again?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea, though.
So why when you play Dark Souls, that in the next room, when you're playing Dark Souls for the 3rd time, in the next room there's 4 archers and a goblin. Yeah. Why does that not affect your enjoyment at all? But like, I think we both have the sense that if the D&D group knew that in that room there's 4 archers and a goblin, it would seem to lose something. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's super fascinating. It's like if you know all of that ahead of time, most D&D parties will sit there and like optimize their strategy so much beforehand, which is fun for them. I don't know if it's fun for the GM. But it's fun when you're a player to like sort of sit there and optimize your strategy. I think you just end up doing that from room to room. Right? Like, going back to the original topic, right? Like, we're talking about secrets and stuff like that. Like, there is something about the fact that you don't just hand the players the source book that you're reading when you're preparing. Like, there's something there about the asymmetry of information that like sort of makes the hobby tick, right? Like, like, so if everybody has the same exact information, it's like, well, then like, what do you lose, right? Like, you lose some of that like tactical ability of surprise, of positioning and things like that. You sort of lose the thought that like maybe the motivations are something they have to tease out and things like that. Like, if they could just go and look up that information in the book, it's like, well, then, what are we doing here, right? Like, you're just sort of, you're like play acting it like a movie at that point or something. But even that, I mean, like, theater is fun for people.
Or a board game, I mean, you're doing something, and it might be fun, but it does feel like there's been sort of a ground change in what we're doing. It doesn't feel like D&D exactly anymore.
I think it would almost be more disconcerting if you were to replay it, but if you subtly change things, right? So there's 5 goblins instead of 4. Like, I think for the players, it'd be more shocking than had they just walked in and not known that there was anything in there. If like they have this sort of notion of, oh, this is what I'm going to see in this room, like, because I know this is what I'm going to see in this room, but then it's not that. Yeah, this really, really makes me want to run the same one shot.
I know.
A couple times. I do too. I'm the same group of people.
I'm incredibly curious now. I mean, if you're listening and you have done this, please tell us. Like, I just would love to hear about someone. If you ran the same thing for the same group and you didn't meaningfully change it up, like, please tell me how it went. There's no chance I'm going to, like, waste one of my precious gaming opportunities this year on a weird experiment that might not be fun. But I Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does also make me wonder, like, yeah, like if that turns out to be fun, then like why not just hand everybody the books,
Yeah.
ahead of time? But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. Like, yeah, you've completely taken this topic and like it made me think about like what if there just are no more secrets, right?
Right.
Like, what about this, Chris? Like, take your question.
Yeah, to bring it back around though, there is something intangible but undeniable about the appeal from me as a game master of those secrets. And I mean, I think it's why I'm going to project out, and I'm going to say a lot of GMs. I mean, I love reading game books. I love reading adventures. I like knowing this stuff. I like getting to see all of the hidden stuff, and I think that secrets is important to me and is one reason I'm still running, D&D and not, I don't know, not something like Dungeon World that just doesn't have the interest in in established secrets, and not bagging on anyone's playstyle in any way, shape, or form. John, if you're listening and you're like writing me an angry email, I deserve it, but
yeah,
I don't know. I do think that secrets and GM knowledge is something special, is like just something kind of unique about this social activity we call role playing. And I think that you can mess around with it. You can even take it out and have a perfectly awesome role playing game. But I think that is an interesting thing. That is a part of the appeal of this whole hobby to me.
Yeah, it's a hobby built on lies and secrets.
Exactly.
All right, well, we should wrap up there. We've been going a little bit. Yeah, this was a really fascinating conversation. I was a little like skeptical at the beginning, but turns out talk about something long enough and we'll make it like into a grand experiment.
Yeah, this is a topic where I just have this strong feeling that that talking to different GMs would get you a variety of interesting answers. There have been several topics we've discussed that I kind of want to like put them on the back burner and spring them on like a future guest. Not to like rehash the same conversation, but because I have a feeling that the other GMs out there would have a different take on this, and I can easily see it. I can easily see different GMs like having a radically different answer to this question. So, anyway.
Yeah, and probably like a fiery opinion on it too.
Yeah.
So one sort of totally unrelated thing that I wanted to bring up. So I put an order in for the Cyberpunk Red Jumpstart kit.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it should be here pretty soon, probably in a week or so.
And just to recap for listeners, this is because you are planning a Cyberpunk campaign.
Yes.
In the pretty near future?
Yeah, as soon as I can, get time and energy to do so. So I've been saying like in 2021 at this point. Yeah. But I don't know, I might push and try to just like do it so I don't sit there and stew on ideas too much. But yeah, it's so I'm really interested in running that. And then I was reading, someone had shared an essay that the creator of Cyberpunk had written just about sort of like police brutality and stuff. And it was a really good essay. And like I started looking up, is this Mike Pondsmith?
Yeah.
Is that his name?
Yep.
Yeah, I just started reading a little bit more about him, and he seemed like just a cool dude. So I decided, like, rather than trying to hack together my own system, like, let's just use the one that he's writing, because he's thought about this a lot more than I have. Yeah, so I'm excited for that to come in, and then we'll see. Like, I don't think it's a super long sort of campaign at all, but I want to run that and then kind of take it from there and see if I can run something else, some sort of long Cyberpunk campaign.
So a couple things in reaction to that. First of all, I just through a quirk of history, I have not really interacted much with any games by Mike Pondsmith's company. And a lot of them look very cool, but just circumstances have gone such that that's like one company I really know very little about their games. But I do know that Mr. Pondsmith is super well regarded in the hobby as a really standout individual. Secondly, I would be really interested, and I want to invite you to think about maybe dedicating a little bit of time on future episodes of this show to talk a little bit about your planning and what you're thinking. And I realize that you may have some players listening, so we don't need to go to like spoiler level stuff, but I would be interested, especially because I know that when you got the idea for this campaign, you ordered like 5 amazing looking cyberpunk-ish role-playing games, any one of which would like be a big great campaign in its own. And I just would love to see what you end up pulling together from this stuff. And maybe if you're running cyberpunk read or whatever the title of it is. Maybe you'll just content yourself just with that. But part of me is kind of hoping you're at least going to flip through some of those other books and be like, oh yeah, that's got to be in this. And I would just like to hear you talk about that. So give us some thought as you prepare about what might be interesting bits to share. So.
For sure. Yeah, if you are listening and you are a former player of mine in any other campaign, reach out, because I am looking for players too. Yeah, it'll probably be online, because everything has to be these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts about cyberpunk. It is, to me, it's one of the more compelling genres because it can get so dang goofy. Yeah, it's just like this, I don't know. I really love the idea of sort of like technology taking over sort of everything in some way, because it's just like history is not borne out that way. Like, right? Like we all thought by 2020 we'd be just jacked in 100% of the time. It's like, turns out that's terrible. So a lot of people don't do that.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
When I think about cyberpunk, there's something about cyberpunk, just the setting. So I love William Gibson. I've read all of his novels. I just absolutely love Neuromancer and its follow-ups, and there's something magical about a Gibson-esque cyberpunk setting in that it would just be a nightmare to live in, just the worst, right?
Yes.
But reading these books, like if you were to say, Andy, pick a fictional world to live in, I would be like, oh my goodness, William Gibson's cyber sprawl. Like, I mean, it would be awful, but what a fascinating, an incredibly full and interesting setting cyberpunk at least has the potential to offer, right?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So Andy, if you were in that setting, do you think you'd be one of the super ultra rich transhumanists, or do you think you'd be one of the low level junkies on the street?
Oh, I mean, so in reality, I would be one of the wage slaves that that work for a megacorp and live in megacorp owned housing, and you spend megacorp bucks to buy food from the megacorp food mall.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think that I love the transhumanist stuff that you get in some cyberpunk, but I mean, there's just something about that, console cowboy, stereotype that I just love. So I've got to say, in my idealized Andy would be on the streets, hacking into stuff for food. We'll hack for food to stick it to the man sort of.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we should wrap it up there. We're both going to go to bed thinking about hacking the megacorps. But
that's right.
Yeah, I think that's good. All right. Well, thank you so much. I have been Chris Salzman.
I have been Andy Rao.
This has been Roll for Topic. And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.
Oh, and hey, you listeners will never know all of the amazing stuff on this podcast that we never shared with you.
Yes.